For 20 years, the island of Ithaca has existed without a king. But before Odysseus can return to fill that void, the epic gives us the Telemachus, the first 4 books of the Odyssey. It is Western literature's earliest coming-of-age story, a Bildungsroman centered entirely on the young prince Telemachus. The second book opens with an immediate break in routine. Telemachus wakes and straps on his sword. He takes up a bronze spear, and flanked by his hunting hounds, calls the men of Ithaca to a formal assembly. He intends to publicly indict the suitors who are consuming his estate. But the suitors' leader, Antinous, refuses the charge, turning the accusation around to blame Penelope and her infamous deceptive weaving. The tension breaks when Zeus sends 2 eagles tearing at each other midair. An Ithacan seer reads this as a divine warning of doom for the suitors, but the warning is immediately and violently mocked. The assembly collapses without a vote or a resolution. To act, Telemachus is forced to bypass the public entirely, securing a ship in secret under the cover of night. Before the prince can attempt to save his father's house, he has to understand the political mechanics of his island. He has to navigate a complete political vacuum. The meeting place Telemachus convenes is the Agorē. Archaeological and textual evidence reveals a monumentalized space at the city's center, the physical arena for public opinion, dormant since Odysseus left for Troy. This space operates on strict institutional rules. The dominant families maintain fixed permanent seats, called thokai. To manage the discussion, specialized officials known as heralds, or carics, moderate the floor. The most crucial mechanism of the Agorē is the skeptron, a physical staff. When the herald places the skeptron into a speaker's hands, it confers the absolute, unquestioned right to address the crowd. An elder named Aegyptius asks the opening question: does the speaker declare some public matter, or demios? This establishes a firm conceptual boundary in archaic Greek thought between the affairs of the state and private household grievances. What Homer details here is a fully functioning proto-democratic institution. It possesses the rudiments of public deliberation, but it is attempting to operate entirely without its central executive, the monarch. So if the king is gone, why can't Telemachus simply declare himself Basileus, king, and command the suitors to leave? First, he is a youth isolated in his own home. The suitors are powerful nobles accompanied by armed retinues. Telemachus has no private army of loyalists to enforce his will. Second, Ithaca is paralyzed by a legal ambiguity. Odysseus is missing, but nobody has proof that he is dead. Without a confirmed death, there can be no clean transfer of power. Telemachus is trapped by the system. He has the royal bloodline, but without the physical might or the structural authority granted by the public's backing, that bloodline is politically useless. Holding the skeptron, Telemachus begins by trying to bridge the gap between private and public. He details the consumption of his estate, framing his household's destruction as a crisis that damages the entire community. He elevates the complaint by appealing to abstract justice, calling on the Olympian gods to witness the suitors' actions, and warning of divine retribution. Antinous immediately counters. He rejects any guilt on the part of the suitors, delivering a speech designed to shift the blame squarely onto Penelope. He reveals that for 3 years, Penelope claimed she would choose a husband only after finishing a burial shroud for Laertes. She wove the massive web by day, and by night she secretly unraveled it. The text defines this trick as dolos, cunning trickery. It places Penelope on the exact same intellectual plane as her husband. She is wielding métis, a specific type of cunning intelligence optimized for survival. It is the capacity to scheme and adapt in dangerous environments. The physical shroud becomes a metaphor for narrative itself. Penelope literally weaves a textile while simultaneously weaving a fiction, using the act of creation to manipulate time, delay the suitors, and maintain control of her house. The debate shifts when Mentor, an old friend of Odysseus, takes the staff. His speech serves as the theological core of the assembly. Mentor questions the very purpose of a good king if the people immediately forget him. He asks why an entire populace tolerates a glaring injustice when they vastly outnumber the handful of men committing it. The grammar of his speech uses an indirect exclamatory clause, a hallmark of blame rhetoric. Crucially, Mentor says he does not direct his indignation, his nemesismai, at the suitors. He directs it at the silent citizens of Ithaca. Mentor isolates a difficult truth about political decay. The destruction of Odysseus's estate is happening not because the suitors are an unstoppable force, but because the majority of the citizenry has chosen to do nothing. Just as the political arguments stall, Zeus interrupts the assembly directly. 2 eagles appear from the mountain peak. They fly in harmony until they reach the airspace directly over the Agorē, where they violently tear at each other's heads and necks. They dart off to the right, or dexio. In the Greek practice of reading bird signs, oionos, the right is the auspicious direction, confirming the event as a deliberate message from the gods. The seer Halitherses stands and interprets the sign. He declares that Odysseus is nearby, and the eagles represent a violent, impending death for every suitor in the hall. This translation captures the omen perfectly. The text reads, "The birds clang their wings, threat and cuff, they tear, their cheeks and neck they rend." But Eurymachus dismisses the wording, telling the old man to take his fables home, arguing not all birds mean anything. This is a critical error. In the Homeric world, openly mocking a seer is a direct rejection of Themis, the personification of divine order and righteous law. By treating divine law as irrelevant to human politics, Eurymachus aligns the suitors with the epic's most famous monsters. They are behaving exactly like the lawless Cyclopes, reducing the elite class of Ithaca to wealthy savages. Following Eurymachus's threat, the assembly simply dissolves. The men return to their homes. There is no vote, no consensus, and no action taken to protect Telemachus. This complete structural failure is a deliberate design choice by Homer. If the citizens had successfully voted to expel the suitors and restore order, the central conflict would be resolved. The Odyssey would effectively end right here in Book 2. Instead, the collapse of the Agorē proves that the public institutions of Ithaca are hopelessly broken. The system cannot save Telemachus. He must find another way. Because the daylight public sphere failed him, the prince pivots to private, covert action. He walks down to the shore and prays directly to Athena, recognizing that human politics have hit a dead end. The goddess answers by appearing in the physical form of Mentor. The Greek text uses the word isomené, likening herself. It creates a layer of dramatic irony where we, the audience, know a god is operating the controls, while the mortal characters see only an old man chartering a ship. Guided by the disguised goddess, Telemachus provisions a ship and leaves Ithaca under the cover of night, fully abandoning the paralyzed state. The education of the prince has begun. Telemachus has learned that when the public state is shattered, inheriting a kingdom requires metis, and the courage to act in the dark.